Today I want to share with you the easy way to build a 2-week emergency food supply. Hi sweet friends, I'm Mary and welcome to Mary's Nest, where I teach traditional cooking skills for making nutrient-dense foods like bone broth, ferment, sourdough, and more. So if you enjoy learning about those things, consider subscribing to my channel and don't forget to click on the little notification bell below. That'll let you know every time I upload a new video. Now, the first thing I want to say is that I'm going to be sharing a tremendous amount of helpful information. But if there's a particular topic that you're interested in and you want to jump ahead, be sure to open the description under this video where I'll have timestamps outlining everything I'm going to be covering. This first segment is really directed at beginners. I want to go over exactly what do we mean when we say an emergency food supply. And then we want to talk about what are your reasons for putting together an emergency food supply and how do those reasons affect what exactly you're going to stock. Here in the United States, we have an organization called the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and other countries probably have something very similar. And what our agency recommends is that we have at a minimum 3 days of food and water. The assumption being that if there is some sort of emergency, that hopefully within 3 days, power will be restored, water will be restored, help will be on the way, or whatever the case may be. However, I think many of us who have been in emergency situations have learned that it's probably smarter to have at least 1 week, preferably 2 weeks, of an emergency supply of food and water. So the focus of putting this emergency food supply together really focuses on the word emergency. You want to be prepared in the event that you potentially have no power, or you potentially have no water, or potentially both, no power and no water, but you are able to stay in your home. So what you stock is going to be based on prior history in your area. However, you also want to be prepared for the unexpected. Now, if you know that many times, either during the winter or during the summer, you lose power, your focus is going to be on having foods that you can prepare without power. On the other hand, if you live in an area where maybe there are floods, and although you're able to stay in your home, are there times when there are water main breaks or situations like that, or the water simply is not clean enough to use, do you have foods that can be prepared without water, or do you have sufficient bottled water that you can use? However, emergency means emergency, and you really want to be prepared for any emergency, even unexpected emergencies. So when looking at foods that you want to stock in your emergency food supply, you want to focus on the fact that you may not have power or water. Okay, so what's the easy way to prepare all of this? The easiest way to know how much food and water you're going to need for a 2-week supply is to simply look at what you buy on a weekly basis. Yes, there are all types of food calculators on the internet where you put in how many adults and how many children are in the family, and then it calculates for you how much of this, that, and the other thing that you're going to need. However, those can sometimes really be overwhelming and not be specific enough to what you already eat. And you want to buy what you eat. So the first thing that you want to think about and write down are all those foods that you would buy in a 1-week period, both non-perishable and perishable. Then you want to break your list into 2 parts where you have all of your non-perishables on one list, and then you have all your perishables on another list. And you want to look at your perishables and see what can you replace those with that are non-perishable. So for example, if you normally buy a fresh whole chicken, what can you buy in place of that that would be non-perishable? Maybe a can of chicken. Then you can add all those non-perishable items that you've come up with to replace your perishable items to your non-perishable list. Now, under normal circumstances, not emergency circumstances, but under normal circumstances, that non-perishable grocery list is what you would use to stock your prepper pantry, or sometimes called your extended pantry, which we'll talk about in a minute. However, what we're talking about here is something different. We're thinking of an emergency food supply, those things that preferably can be cooked without electricity and potentially without a water supply, or if you're using bottled water, something that doesn't need too much water because you want to conserve the bottled water you have. So the next thing that you want to do is go down your non-perishable list and remove those items that you feel might take a lot of time, energy, water, so on and so forth to cook. Now you have a list of non-perishable foods that are going to work very well in a 2-week emergency food supply. Now, as you're preparing that list of non-perishable foods that you think will fit well into your 2-week emergency food supply, I also want to help you with this, because what I'm going to do next is go over all the different categories of foods that fit well into that description for an emergency food supply. Now, what I want to share with you, and I think this will be exceptionally helpful to beginners, as well as those of us who are more experienced in storing these things. Hopefully I'll have some new ideas for you. But what I want to share are the things that I put on my non-perishable food list that I think are very good for me to have in my 2-week emergency food supply. Now, before we get started going over all the different categories of foods that I recommend, I want to let you know that if you check the description below underneath this video, there will be a link that'll take you over to my website, Mary's Nest, the same name as my YouTube channel, where I'll have some free printouts for you, and no email required. It'll be very easy for you to print these out. One will list all of the categories of foods with detailed foods listed underneath of what I keep on my non-perishable list for putting together my 2-week emergency pantry. And then the other handout or printout, the other printout will be a 7-day menu plan that you can just kind of rotate through, hopefully just for 1 week. But if you are having to go through your entire 2-week emergency food supply, you can just repeat through that week. And that will have all the ideas for you that you'll need based on all of the foods you may have on hand for your or in your 2-week emergency food supply. And that way you can keep that menu plan with your emergency food supply. And then, God forbid, there's an emergency, you know you've got your menu plan and you've got your food and you can keep everyone fed. Now, before we get started going over all the different foods that I recommend that you keep on hand for an emergency food supply, I want to say that this is really the beginning or the start of building a bigger pantry, what we refer to as an extended pantry or a prepper pantry. Now, if you've been with me for a while, you know that I talk about the 4 corners pantry. And the 4 corners represent your everyday working pantry that you access, obviously, on a daily basis, and your refrigerator and your freezer, and then your extended or prepper pantry. And over time, you want to think about building up your prepper pantry so that you have more than just a 2-week supply of emergency food, that you have other foods that basically can restock your everyday working pantry for whatever reason may come up. Job loss, illness, what we've gone through during 2020 and now 2021. You know, it's just to have that sort of insurance policy of food and water and maybe other articles, toilet articles and so on and so forth, that are helpful to you in the event that you're not able to get out of your home or you're just short on money. And I have a complete series on how to start a prepper pantry, how to start filling your prepper pantry with just $5 extra a week, how to properly store food, how to use Mylar bags, oxygen absorbers, silica gel packs. I go over all of this in great detail, and I'll be sure to link to my prepper pantry series in the iCards above or in the description below. And it's just a playlist, and you can look down and look through it and see what specifically addresses your needs. And when you're over on my website getting the printouts that I talked about earlier, I also have a very detailed, and it's also free, 36-page pantry list. And this pantry list is something that will really help you as you go ahead stocking your Four Corners pantry, specifically when you're moving from a processed foods kitchen to a traditional foods kitchen. Because when it comes to all of this, whether we're talking about an emergency food supply or more of an extended food supply in our prepper pantry, I always try to focus on stocking real food that is as real as possible and very limited in processed ingredients. So you might find that very helpful. You can download that and put it in your kitchen journal, or you can just have it on your phone when you go shopping. And it addresses everything. It addresses what real traditional foods, real foods you should have in your prepper pantry, in your working pantry, your fridge, your freezer, as well as your extended pantry. And it's not just a list. I include links to videos and printable recipes for how to use all of these foods that you're going to be stocking, as well as how to make many of these things homemade. Baking mixes, pancake mix, homemade cottage cheese, homemade salad dressings, homemade spice mixes. All of that I have for you either in a video as well as a printable recipe. So be sure to check that list out when you're over there on my website. Now, even though I show you how to make a lot of things homemade, and you very well may have those on hand, I always like to make sure that I have items that I've purchased at the store more or less as backups. Yes, I can have a homemade pancake mix all ready to go, but knowing that I have something that I've purchased from the grocery store that may only require a little water being added to it as opposed to an egg or butter or so on and so forth, I find that is the type of perfect food that I want in an emergency food supply. So keep in mind as we go over all of these foods, yes, much of this you can make homemade under normal circumstances. However, when it comes to an emergency food supply, we want to make sure that we have things that go one step beyond what we can make homemade, because they may have added ingredients that are not necessarily easy for us to add at home and that may just require a little water to prepare. So as your guiding principle, as you go forward in preparing this 2-week emergency food supply, you always want to focus on what can be eaten very easily, maybe simply by opening a can. Now, as we go through the different categories of foods for building our 2-week emergency food supply, I'll also talk about some very simple ways for warming some of these foods. Because I know some of you have told me that depending on where you live, you want a simple way to maybe warm a can of food or to warm some water to make a cup of tea or instant coffee, but nothing that's very involved, because you're not in a position to have a grill, whether with charcoal or a gas grill, and you don't want to keep anything in your home that may be flammable, and I understand that completely. So I've got some very simple ways to help you warm some foods, and we'll be sharing those. Now, when it comes to food supplies, the first thing you want to think about in an emergency where you lose power is that you want to use your perishable foods first. After about 4 hours of no power, most refrigerators here in the United States will start to reach about 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's the temperature at which perishable foods will begin to spoil and eventually develop bad bacteria and could give you food poisoning. Now, there's a very clever device that it works with a magnet and it runs on batteries. You can put that onto your refrigerator, and it'll have another piece that'll go into your fridge and another piece that'll go into your freezer. And this is something you put on your refrigerator when you have power, and you can just leave it there all the time, and it'll just be monitoring what the temperature is in your fridge and your freezer. But what's so great is it runs on batteries, so when the power goes out, you still have that device attached to your refrigerator. It's magnetized, it's a small little thing, and you can watch and see when that temperature is starting to tick up to the 40 Fahrenheit, and if your power's not come back on, you know at that point, okay, I've got to start using my perishable food, or I have to put it in some sort of cooler. And if it's very hot, hopefully you've put some ice blocks or ice packs, in your freezer that you can take out and put those on top of your food. Or if, like what we went through in February of this year here in Central Texas, when we had ice storms and snow and so on and so forth, it was only 5 degrees outside. So we just put our coolers outside. Now we'll start going through the different categories of food, and basically what you're going to be looking at are what are those things that you can find in your breakfast aisle, and then what are the different types of foods you can find in canned food categories, whether it's protein, whether it's fruit, or whether it's vegetables. And then you're also going to want to think of other dried goods as well as pet supplies if you have pets. Now, chances are, if you're working on building your 2-week emergency food supply, you're probably also at the beginning of building your pantry or stocking your pantry, and specifically stocking your prepper pantry, because the emergency food supply really is the beginning. But what you want to make sure is that in your everyday working pantry, where you have your week's worth or so of food and supplies, you want to make sure you have some very basic supplies, including salt and pepper, a variety of seasonings, including dried herbs and spices, as well as flavored extracts. Having those basic supplies on hand will help in the preparation of your various emergency food supply. And if you'd like to learn how to make your own seasoning blends as well as your own flavored extracts, including vanilla extract, I have videos where I show you how to do all that, and I'll be sure to link to it in the iCards and in the description below. Now, the first thing I want to talk about are breakfast foods that are great to keep in an emergency food supply. And the nice thing about breakfast foods is that they can really span pretty much every meal. We often hear breakfast for dinner, and so these can fill the need of supplying you food for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, as well as snacks. So really be generous when you're putting together your 2-week emergency food supply of focusing on those things that are breakfast foods. Now, a couple of things I want to mention. I don't want you to be overwhelmed by any of this. These are all things that I've pulled out of my emergency food supply to share with you, but they're also things that I've worked on gathering over time. I'll often just add a little extra money to my grocery shopping and add little things one by one. I also take advantage of in-store coupons at my local grocery store when they have a buy one, get one free, or 25% off, or things like that. And I also always check the clearance aisle at my grocery store. And if you shop your clearance aisle, just be aware of use-by dates. For example, I found these blueberry biscuits in the clearance section at my grocery store, and they're 5 pouches of 4 biscuits each, and it was just $1.62. And the best by date is through March 2022. So I thought that this was something very good to keep in my emergency food supply. And speaking of best by dates, I have a video in my Prepper Pantry series where I go into all of this in detail. It's where I talk about something that I refer to as forever foods. And I have a lot of information that I'll also link to in the blog post that'll correspond with this video, where I give you resources where you can learn about how long you really can rely on being able to eat food well past its best by date. And that's especially true when it comes to canned foods. So having canned foods in your emergency food supply can be very handy, because they often are excellent sources of food well past their best by date. But even so, when it comes to keeping a 2-week emergency food supply, of non-perishable foods, you really want to think of them in general terms in the way you think about other areas of your prepper pantry with non-perishable foods. You do want to be rotating them through and conscious of the use-by dates so that you don't get into a situation where you have a lot of food that's stale or well past its best-by date or use-by date. So I often try to operate on a first in, first out basis. And even though there are things in my emergency food supply like dried milk and canned evaporated milk, which we'll talk about in a minute, what I do is I keep these up until a point where it is getting close to their best use by date, and then I will just simply start to incorporate them into my everyday meals and replace them with fresher items. And for the most part, I try to buy foods that are shelf-stable and that are easy to prepare, but that also lean more natural and farther away from being a very processed food. Now, some of you have mentioned to me who are familiar with my Prepper Pantry series that I often tend to have a lot of organic items and that those really don't fit your budget. I understand that completely. I'm the first person to always say, never worry about buying organic, stay within your budget. But my grocery store, H-E-B, for those of you who live in Central Texas will be very familiar with it, has lots of organic food that's very cost effective and is very affordable. It's really a mission, in essence, that they're on. So that's why you'll see that I'll often have organic food, but with the H-E-B label, because it's often very reasonably priced and often will come with an in-store coupon. But know that you do not have to buy anything organic if that doesn't fit in your budget. Just buy what you can afford and be prepared. Now let's go through these foods that I have here. You may like different brands, that's fine. I generally just buy things that are on sale. That's why you see I have a lot of different brands. I'm not really loyal to one particular brand. But let's go through all of these and I can explain why I pick them for my emergency food supply. And also don't forget to download that free printout where I talk about how to incorporate all of these into meals. And a link to that printout along with the list of all of the various foods that I'm going to talk about will be in the description below. Now this pancake and waffle mix was very interesting to me. I normally don't buy things like this because I make my own whole grain pancake and waffle mixes. However, these are all sealed up, in the factory, and they're very shelf stable, and so it's a great thing to have on hand. And the reason that I liked this particular brand was it also had an in-store coupon, which helped. But it is 100% whole grains. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the interesting varieties they have, but basically it's made with 100% whole grain wheat flour and 100% whole grain oat flour, and then some other ingredients. And it also has whey in it, which is what helps, dried whey, which helps make it protein packed. And some of them, depending what variety you buy, some are also, if you're avoiding dairy, I guess, they use pea protein. So just look at the ingredients and see what might fit well in your diet. And what's nice is to prepare this, all you need is water. So if you have a little trivet, which I'll bring out and show you, with the little tea candles underneath and just a little small frying pan, you will be able to get that hot enough to make pancakes. And pancakes can be a real comfort food, especially if it's cold out and you have no power and the temperature in your house is dropping. Now, I like to keep honey on hand because this does not require refrigeration once you open it, and a nice drizzle of honey on the pancakes will be wonderful. You could also use maple syrup. However, once you open maple syrup, it really should be refrigerated. So maybe if you have some small bottles of maple syrup, they could be very handy, but generally I'll just keep honey on hand. Now, going back to this pancake mix, what I found very interesting was that they have a gluten-free variety. And we're not a gluten-free household, but I bought this. Number one, I want to try it for those of you who are gluten-free so I can give you my review of it. Know that these are all things I buy. This is not a sponsored post or a sponsored video. These are just foods that I buy and keep in my home. But this really intrigued me. And so when I saw this, I said, I'm going to get this. I'm going to give it a try. But that's maybe something that you want to consider looking into if you do have a gluten-free household. And then this, they think of everything. They have the protein packed. So I guess this is even more protein packed than these. But there's no sugar added in this one. And it's for the carb conscious crowd. So this may fit, I don't know if it would really fit the keto crowd, but if you're doing low carb, this might come in handy for you. And then I've got some instant oatmeals here, as well as some old-fashioned oats. And this can be very easy to prepare. You know, again, if you have a little trivet, or you have a little chafing dish, or you have a fondue pot, these are all ways you can warm water. And so very easily with the little cast iron trivet that I talked about, or the fondue pot, you can just use a little tea candle and it will warm things nicely. If you're comfortable keeping sterno, you can also have sterno with a chafing dish, and that can warm liquids for you. So you have options if you don't have the ability of having a little portable, cooker with some propane. But those are things that I've never really been comfortable keeping. So if the weather's cold, being able to just do something inside with some tea lights is perfect for me. And many of you have told me that you like that idea as well. Now, if it's warm, you have a lot more options if you have outside cooking facilities. But if not, again, you can always rely on the tea candle approach. But what's nice about this is these are protein packed and they're relatively low in sugar. So if you're looking for foods, depending on who you might be feeding in your family, especially if you have teenagers and they require a lot of protein, these Kodiak brands are very high in protein. Then of course there's just the typical original instant oatmeal that, again, just some warm water works perfectly. If you have the old-fashioned oats, you can soak these overnight in some water, and then you could just warm them, on your little trivet, or simply eat them, at room temperature, whatever you're comfortable with. So you've got some options, and having the honey, whether it's pancakes or oatmeal, is going to be very enjoyable. Now over here, I want to talk about the jams and the jellies I have here. I just have, again, a different variety. If you're familiar with the store Tuesday Morning, I found some nice marmalade there. It was very reasonable. And then I've just got some different jams here in relatively small jars, because this is going to need to be refrigerated once you open it. And so I really like to think of, well, what can we eat, relatively quickly without it going bad, without it needing to be refrigerated. So having small jars of foods that you might enjoy, but that under normal circumstances would eventually require refrigeration, but based on your family size, you're going to know how quickly you're going to be able to use this. When you're putting your non-perishable food list together, the one that's going to be focused on your 2-week emergency food supply list, you're going to want to think about the fact that, okay, this is what I buy in a week for myself or my family. However, in an emergency situation, may you wind up having other people in your home with you, maybe adult children, maybe aging parents. And so that's something to keep in mind, because if you're feeding, say, 6 people and you're doing something, I've got peanut butter here, which we'll talk in a minute, but if you're making peanut butter and jelly crackers, you might go through this very quickly. And I have to tell you that we love having peanut butter in our emergency food supply. And if peanut butter doesn't agree with you, maybe some other type of nut butter will. But I have to tell you, this was so helpful to us when we had all those cold storms here in February, here in Central Texas. We enjoyed a lot of peanut butter. So I always like to make sure that I have enough peanut butter on hand, because then what you can do is, if you've got some saltine crackers, or over here I really like these Wassa crackers. They have a fairly good shelf life. They don't contain any fat. And that's something that I want to mention when you're looking for crackers to keep in your 2-week emergency food supply. Finding crackers that are made without any fat will generally have a longer shelf life. So that's something to think about. Also the same, if you're looking to have like a little bread in your emergency food supply that has a more extended shelf life, these very thin, dense German breads have a good shelf life. Many of these things are going to have a shelf life of at least 6 months. Up to 1 year. Maybe in some cases these things will have a shelf life up to 2 years. And again, be sure to check out the links that I'll share with you in the blog post that talk about how you don't need to be, or we all don't need to be, as concerned about expiration dates or best by dates or use by dates as we think we do. So that's a good thing to know. But you've got these breads, you've got crackers, you've got saltines, and these all do double duty, because the saltines can be great with canned soup, which we'll talk about later. They can be great with peanut butter and jam on them. The breads can be used to make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches or jam, and the same with the rye crackers. So there's, you can put the peanut butter on them, or jam, or both. So you have a lot of variety and versatility in terms of what you're preparing. I also like to keep some of these sort of grab-and-go kind of granola bars, or these are kind of like fruit breakfast bars. We already talked about these little, or no, actually I talked about these. These are very similar breakfast bars of my grocery store brand, but very similar to the Nature Valley. And these are great just as a snack, or if this is something that you want to have for breakfast. They're very filling. And things like this require zero preparation. So if you're tired, if you're out having to do a lot of work outside, we had tree limbs come down, and then we're on our roof, and it was very cold outside. And sometimes after you've been working outside in bad weather for a long time, it may take you a while to regain your energy to prepare something. And so having these things that can just, you rip open a package and eat, it's not something we normally would eat on a regular basis. But again, as I said, when you're thinking emergency food supply, it's a little different than when you're just thinking in terms of your general pepper pantry supplies, where you may be doing a lot of cooking and making things homemade. Having these type of things on hand can come in very handy. Now, when it comes to dairy, I really like to keep powdered milks on hand, and I like to keep a whole milk powder, and I like to keep a non-fat powder. This has a longer shelf life than this, so that's why I like to have the non-fat milk powder as well. Now again, yes, are these things that I generally use? No, but we have to think a little differently for emergency food supplies, because I know some of you have said to me that you're very concerned that I've got some powdered milk because it's not as healthy, obviously, as fresh milk, and sometimes the process of drying these milks can damage some of the proteins, and that is true. However, if you're in a situation where maybe this is all you're going to have for about 2 weeks, I'm okay with it, because it's not something that you're eating every single day, day in and day out throughout the year. Again, this is emergency food. And if you don't take dairy, canned coconut milk is always an option. I really like these milks that are in cans as opposed to the boxes. I think that this is easier to keep fresh longer. Now, although I have videos where I show you how to make sweetened condensed milk and evaporated milk, these are very easy to make homemade. But again, I always like to have these things on hand in the event of an emergency. You can thin this and it'll be like a sweetened milk, which can be a nice treat with some cereal. or you can add some water to the evaporated milk, and you've got milk ready to go for your cereal. I also keep some goat milk on hand. This is very easy to digest, so if you find that cow's milk is a little hard for you to digest and you prefer goat's milk, you can find this in the can. And something I want to mention, if you keep chia seeds on hand, you can take some of your evaporated milk, and you can leave this full strength if you want, or you can dilute it with some water, or you can reconstitute any of your powdered milks, and you can add some chia seeds to it. And if you have some flavored extracts on hand, like vanilla extract, you can add that to it, and the chia seeds will actually thicken it up a little, almost making it like a yogurt or a pudding, which can be a nice little treat, but also something that's going to be rather nutritious because chia seeds are high in protein. I also like to keep a little collection of dried cereals on hand, and I'll even have a little bit of granola, although I do make homemade granola. Again, what if we've run out of it, and I haven't restocked my supply, I didn't have a chance. It can be one of those things where you're thinking, oh, I think I'll do that tomorrow, and then you lose power. So I always like to keep a little store-bought granola on hand, and then some different cereals. I've had this before. This is very nice. It's kind of like grape nuts, and this is sprouted. So if you followed my videos where I teach you how to soak and sprout grains and also make your own sprouted flour because it's easier to digest, you may like cereals like this that are made from sprouted flour. They're very easy to digest. And then I also like to keep a little Raisin Bran on hand. That's tasty. Oh, I've got these SOCIALIZE here. And again, just buy these things over time and buy what you like and you can also buy things that you may see that I'm buying that maybe you haven't had before, and you experiment. I hope that I can help you with some new ideas, and you can try them. And if you like them, that's something you can add to your list. These are terrific. You can soak these in some water or some reconstituted milk or some evaporated milk, and they're very, very delightful to eat. I find it a little more interesting than just the plain oatmeal because it usually has like dried fruit and nuts in it, and it's very nice. And something that you can think about when you're rehydrating your powdered milk, you can even rehydrate it with your cans of evaporated milk to make it a little more protein rich and a little richer tasting, because sometimes powdered milk or evaporated milk can sometimes have a little bit of a watery flavor. But by taking the powdered milk and reconstituting it with the evaporated milk makes for a richer mouthfeel and something that children might like a little more. And then if you take some of that and you soak some of your muesli, that's a wonderful breakfast. And really with any of these, the oatmeal or the muesli, you can stir in a little peanut butter for added protein and added feeling of fullness. And then of course, where would we be without our tea and coffee? And having a selection of tea bags on hand, and if you have that trivet that I talked about, and I'll be sure to I'll show that to you, but I'll also put a link to it in the description below. That is such a handy thing because it's a little large. It's not just a single trivet, it's kind of a triple trivet, and it uses 3 little votive candles, and they have a little teapot that I can put on that and warm some water. And so it's nice to have a selection of teas on hand. We have the decaf here. These are actually large ones that are for making iced tea. So if we've got some water and it's hot out, it may not be very cold, but at least we could make some iced tea. But also just in general, having a selection of tea bags, decaf, caffeinated, herbal tea, that can be wonderful. And also keeping on hand some instant coffee. You all know how I love my coffee. And this is a pretty nice instant coffee. If you have a little old-fashioned percolator, like a camping coffee pot, or one that would normally go on the stovetop, you may be able to get enough heat out of your trivet to actually put some regular coffee in there and get it to perk and make a nice fresh cup of coffee. But having the instant coffee on hand makes it easy if you're just trying to, when you just warm some water and then can mix that in your cup and you're all set. Now, I do have one of those old-fashioned coffee pots, that you would use on a trivet or over a fire or on the stovetop. But I've got that out in my garage for emergencies. I didn't have that when we went through the Texas storms, but I did have this espresso pot. And it was funny because we were all laughing after the storm about how here we have no power, but I'm saying, well, I can make espresso. Now, we already talked about keeping some instant coffee and tea on hand, but I also want to talk about some other beverages as well. Water is going to be your most important, especially if you find yourself in a situation where you're without water. And that was a very common problem here in Texas when we went through those winter storms last February. Now, you want to have at least 1 gallon of water per person, both for drinking and personal hygiene. However, you probably want to have more than that so that you do have water to reconstitute powdered milk, or maybe you do want to do a little cooking. And so having extra water will never serve you wrong. We even used a tub liner, and so we were able to fill our tub with water so that we would have backup water. And I talk all about that and all the other emergency equipment that we used and added from learning after those storms, which I'll be sure to link to that video. But in addition to water, I like to have some juice on hand. You can have bottled juice or you can have juice boxes. Again, I find the smaller sizes, although a little more costly, given that we're a relatively small family, rather than opening a big bottle of juice that we may not finish and would need refrigeration. I find the little individual servings are perfect for an emergency food supply. It's also nice to keep a variety of beverages in your emergency food supply, things that you like or that your family likes. We like the vitamin water, and it's very good at adding electrolytes into your diet. I show you how to make a homemade electrolyte powder. You can certainly keep that on hand as well. But again, as I said earlier, in case I've run out of any of these things, I always like having a few already prepared items like this. I also keep some soda on hand. We keep the Zevia. It's just sweetened with stevia, so we don't have to worry so much about having too much sugar. And these V8 energy drinks can be very great too, and they're just they just use green tea to give them the little bit of energy boost. So it's not a lot of chemicals or something that's really going to make you a little wired. Now I want to go over some items that are very good protein sources, but that are very shelf stable. And in talking about these things, I want to show you the trivet that I mentioned earlier. This is a cast iron trivet. It's got some pretty good weight to it. And down here on the bottom, you can put 3 little votive candles. And now you have a nice little cooking surface. Given that this is cast iron, once it heats up, it's going to get very hot. So you want to make sure that wherever you put this, you're putting it on a heat-proof surface and one that's very steady. And so be very careful using this. But it can really come in handy, especially if you're very limited on the various sources you have for heating food. And when I talk about votive candles, or I use the term votive candles, some of you may also know them as tea candles. And they're just little tiny candles like this that'll fit perfectly into the bottom of this trivet, and they're very reasonable, and you can buy them in bulk. Shopping for these around holiday time is a very good idea because there'll be lots of these at the various craft stores because people use them at Christmas time, and then often you can find them on sale. But I'll be sure to link to these as well as the trivet in the description below. Now there's a wide variety of protein foods that you can find in cans today. In my Prepper Pantry videos, I've talked about canned chicken, and here I've got some beef stew in a can. I've got some canned salmon. I've got sardines. Whoops! I've got kippers. You know how I love kippers. And we've got some corned beef hash here, and some chilies. We've got a little canned ham. We've got some beans. Again, you may be wondering, oh gosh, she's again with buying the organic black beans, or just organic things in general. But these were such a good buy. I got 2 for $1, so I was very happy with that. Now, speaking of beans, can you keep dry beans on hand? Of course. And can you keep rice on hand? Of course. But we're talking about emergency food supplies in the event that we may not have power. So that's why you always want to make sure that you have some canned beans, because it's great to have dried beans. I keep a lot of dried beans on hand in my prepper pantry, but I have power most of the time. But it's that time when you don't have power and all you have is a bag of dried beans, it's not going to do you a lot of good. So being able to have some in cans is very helpful. And also keeping some of these cheeses on hand is a nice thing to have, especially if you've got some of those whole grain crackers, like I had the rye Wassa crackers, or the dense, thin sliced German breads that have a good shelf life. Yes, these are not the most perfect cheeses in the world. They are basically a processed cheese, but they are shelf stable. They don't need to be refrigerated, and they have a shelf life of about 6 months. We're in September now, and these are good through the end of March. So that's something that's good to keep on hand. And I want to talk to you about how to warm food in cans in a minute, but you may be wondering over here why I'm showing potatoes. And the reason is these are diced potatoes and they're already cooked. So basically all they need to be warmed, although you could eat them cold right out of the can if you wanted. But I like to have these on hand because I also like to keep a little corned beef on hand. And what I try to do is when I look for any of these canned foods, I try to find those that have the least ingredients. Yes, they do sometimes have preservatives in them. That can often be, no way to get around that. But I try to look for those that start with the main ingredient. The first ingredient listed here is beef. So that's a good sign. And I try to look for things that are low in sugar and low in preservatives. But the reason that I like to keep the potatoes on hand, since this is corned beef, this can come right out of the can. I can shred this up or dice it up. I can mix it with the potatoes, and then I can just do my own corned beef hash. Now, a great way to warm any of these foods, like for example, this is a chili. Say you wanted to eat this chili. Now, if you have a little saucepan that you can go ahead and put on your trivet, that's great. But if not, make sure, that's another thing I want to mention, make sure you have a can opener, because not everything has these pop tops. Sometimes you're going to need a can opener to open your cans, and you want a manual can opener, not an electric can opener. So that's a good thing to keep in your prepper pantry on your shelf, wherever you keep your emergency food supply. So that way you have everything in one place. But what you can do is remove this label, wash the can, remove the top, and then you can just go ahead and put this over the flame on your trivet. You can put a little aluminum foil on top to cover it if you want. Some people may just poke holes in the top, but then you're dealing with a hot can that you're trying to get the lid off later. So I don't recommend that. I recommend just take the label off. Wash the can, take the lid off, put it on your trivet with your tea candle or your votive candle underneath, and this will warm nicely. And then you've got a nice warm can of chili. But certainly if you have a saucepan, a small saucepan or a small frying pan, those can work very well on these trivets as well. Now, some other items I've got here are canned salmon, and the kippers, as I mentioned earlier, and the sardines. These can all be eaten right out of the can. Also, if you have tuna fish, these can be eaten right out of the can. You don't need to be worrying about warming anything. Having one of these cooked hams can be very nice. You can take this out and slice this very thin, make a sandwich with that thick German bread, or dense, thin-cut German bread, or put this on crackers. So this can be very versatile. And again, as you'll see, I just have a variety of items here because I just keep my eyes open for when things are on sale or they have an in-store coupon. And again, what I'll do is, if it is on sale or there isn't a coupon with it, I'll read the ingredients, and if I find that it really has a very, very long list of ingredients, I'll generally pass it up. But if the list of ingredients isn't too long and the things aren't, too artificial, then I'll go ahead and buy it and add it to my emergency food supply. Now, I want to mention, in that meal plan that I share with you, I list a chicken tortilla soup, and I have a recipe for that and a video that you can watch. And basically, all it's doing is using a can of chicken and some other canned foods, some black beans, some corn, some salsa, and you can warm that up on your trivet in your saucepan, and it can be ready in no time, and you have sort of this nice semi-homemade chicken tortilla soup. And we generally always have tortilla chips on hand, so we can crumble some of these on top of our soup. But this is just sort of like an everyday working pantry kind of food. These don't have a long shelf life, and especially once they're open, but they are nice to have, and you can enjoy them with a lot of different things, some salsa or the chicken tortilla soup in which you've crumbled these on top. But I think you'll find that meal plan very helpful on how to combine these different foods to put together a meal, and be sure to print that out and keep it with your 2-week emergency food supply. Now here I've got some canned fruits and vegetables, some canned soups. These are all wonderful things to have on hand. Now yes, I show you how to make homemade fermented salsa. I show you how to make pickles and how to water bath can them, so maybe you've got those on hand. I also show you how to make fermented red cabbage, and I show you how to pickle beets. But like I said, in the event that I've run out of any of these things, or I just don't have them, I really like to make sure that I do have some store-bought backups. I think that's very important when you're thinking emergency food supply. You can have your pickled beets, your water bath canned, pickles, and all these different things in your prepper pantry, but knowing that if those get used up and you've got a few store-bought backups, that can really be a lifesaver. Also, if for any reason you're putting together a box of food for a friend or a neighbor who may find themselves short on food, giving them store-bought items can often be very reassuring to them, because some people are not comfortable eating home canned goods. So you may have the home canned goods for your own self and your family, but when you want to put something together for a neighbor, you can give them the store-bought items. Now, generally, I like to have as small container of these things as possible, because once they're open, they either need to be eaten or refrigerated. Now, I do have a little larger size of the salsa, because this is one of the ingredients that goes in to that quick chicken tortilla soup that I mentioned earlier. And then whatever we have left, we can enjoy with the tortilla chips. And again, the same with the pickles and the beets and the red cabbage. You're going to want to find sizes that you know that you can eat relatively quickly if you have no power and you can't refrigerate anything. But having the pickles is especially nice if you've got some tuna fish or the canned salmon, and you're really not in a position to be using mayonnaise, either because you don't have any, or you don't want to, maybe from your perishable food, you've used that up very quickly, or you don't want to buy a jar and open it and then have no way to refrigerate it and it just spoil. So the pickles can really be a nice flavor enhancer for your canned fish. I always like to keep some canned peas on hand. They're high in protein, and I like them, but again, buy what you like, buy what you eat, I've got canned corn here. I've got canned string beans. These are always popular. And then fruits, I like to just keep a variety. Again, shop what's on sale. I really believe in that. And shop what's simple. So I've got some, in terms of simple ingredients. So you're trying to stay as true to the real foods that you normally eat as you're either having your full-blown traditional foods kitchen, or you're transitioning from a processed food kitchen to a traditional foods kitchen, and you're really trying to eat foods that are as simply prepared as possible. And again, I just look store brand, name brand, what's on sale. It doesn't matter to me. but having a variety is nice. And again, with applesauce, if you have a big jar of applesauce and you open it and you have no way to refrigerate it, you're going to risk it spoiling. So it is very nice, especially if you have young children, having these little individual servings of applesauce. That can come in very handy. And then soups, I always like to have canned soups on hand. Yes, you can have your own home canned soups if you pressure can, but having some store-bought canned soups on hand is very helpful as well. And what I like to do is to make sure that I have some that are like chicken soup, chicken and rice, or chicken noodle soup, in the event that, in general, those are just nice soups. But in the event that you have anybody with you who is sick, those type of soups can be very comforting. And especially if you have no power and it's cold in the house, if it's wintertime and somebody's got a cold, and you can warm them up a can of whatever I've got here, chicken noodle. It's very nice and it's very comforting and very healing. And I like this brand. I look for this whenever there's a coupon or it goes on sale. This is made, I think, by Campbell's, yes, but it has very simple ingredients in it. So again, always looking for simple, always looking for your real foods. What I've got here are some dried goods that can be prepared very easily. Now, I think so many of us are familiar with ramen noodles. And basically, if you have your trivet or some other ability to warm liquid, maybe in your fondue pot, you can easily prepare ramen. And there are all sorts of brands out there. We really like this brand, and it's very affordable. And yes, it's made with, it's organic again, but we usually have a coupon for this. And it's a little healthier than some of those mainstream ramen noodles, but that's a wonderful thing that you can heat up. And what I like to do, I've also got over here, are just plain what they call rice sticks. These are rice noodles. They cook up literally in hot water or hot broth in like a minute. So this is something that I think is excellent for emergency food. What I like to do is, you all know I make a ton of bone broth. I don't can my bone broth, and the reason is, first of all, it would need to be pressure canned because it's not a high acid food. Low acid foods need to be pressure canned. And what happens is, pressure canning is done at a high temperature for a prolonged period of time. And that can damage the gelatin that we work so hard to achieve, the nice gelatinous nature of our bone broth. So I generally don't can bone broth. You certainly can can it if you have a pressure canner and have that just as a backup resource. It's still, and it'd be perfect in your emergency food supply, and it's still nutritious. But as I said, I don't pressure can my broth, and really for more than just the fact that it would it does slightly damage the gelatin. However, I also don't have a pressure canner. When you pressure can, you need special equipment, and I don't have one. They were very hard to get during everything we went through in 2020 and now in 2021. But yes, you can pressure can your bone broth, but I would recommend only pressure canning that which you feel will be a sufficient amount for your emergency food supply. But what I do instead is I just pick up some of this chicken stock. I believe I get this at Costco. And I like this because it's very simple. It's chicken, onion, celery. I think they've got some parsley, or no, those are carrots. It looks like the greens on top of the carrots. Carrots, and then some herbs and spices. It's a pretty simple recipe. And so I like to keep this on hand in my emergency supply, because if I'm going to warm some of this, say I've got my little saucepan on my trivet and I want to put in some of these, I don't have to waste water. Instead, I can use some of the chicken stock that I've got here, and it adds nutrition. Now here I do have some things that require a little more, shall I say, like serious cooking. But even with a trivet and a frying pan, you can cook some angel hair pasta. Now you can cook regular spaghetti in a frying pan, and you could use your chicken stock or your canned chicken bone broth, or you could even just do water. And it will cook. You don't have to have a big stock pot and boiling a lot of water. You can cook that right in a frying pan. And I highly recommend, so that it goes quick and easy for you, that you stick with your smaller pastas. Over here, I've got some encina di pepe. It's very small. You can put that in a little broth. It can kind of extend broth, and meaning that you make it a little more filling. But you could put some of this in a little frying pan on your trivet, and then you could add some, I've got some canned tomatoes here. Or once it softens, this literally will be ready like in 2 minutes. You can toss it with some pesto. This comes right out of the jar. Just toss it in the hot pasta. You can, if you have a saucepan, you can, a small saucepan, you can warm some spaghetti sauce, or you can just add it right into the frying pan with the spaghetti and water, and just make a little bit, almost like a little bit of a marinara. So there's a lot of things you can do with your quicker cooking pastas. Also, this isn't something I generally use. You know, when we were talking about having dried beans and regular rice, that's great. But in an emergency, having a little instant rice or some bulgur wheat like this. This is a Central Market brand. This is also made by my grocery store. These basically cook in, they don't even really need to be cooked per se. If you've got some hot water and you let them sit in hot water, you'll have some nice bulgur wheat, or you'll have some rice. You can warm them in some hot broth, and it can be very filling. And in the case of the bulgur wheat, which is basically a whole grain wheat that's been cracked and parboiled, and so this is very nutritious, more so than just some instant rice. But sometimes, you know, especially if you're feeling a little under the weather, the rice can be very comforting. So that's something good to have. The same with couscous. Very much like the instant rice and the bulgur wheat, you can just put this in some hot liquid and it'll soften up and be very tasty. Also, I've got some macaroni and cheese here. You can cook the macaroni much in the way that you would cook the pasta. You could even, you don't have to have a big thing of boiling water. It will soften eventually in a frying pan with some water, and then you can add the cheese powder, and you can use some evaporated milk, or you can reconstitute your powdered milk, and you can have a little macaroni and cheese. And I'll definitely go into more detail about how to do these things, like cooking spaghetti in a frying pan, in the blog post. Now, having some condiments and cooking fats in your emergency food supply is very important. It really can help you add flavor to any of the foods that you are preparing. Now, I like to make my own apple cider vinegar. I've got a lot of videos, which I'll be sure to link to, where I show you how to go through the whole 30-day process. But I also like to have at least 1 bottle of store-bought. In the event that my homemade has run out, or I haven't had a chance to make it, whatever the case may be, I always have this, and not just in my emergency food supply, but just in my prepper pantry in general. This basically has an unlimited shelf life. And this can be really nice along with some olive oil in place of mayonnaise, in mixing up some tuna fish or some of the canned salmon, and then you have the pickles, and it can be very flavorful. And the olive oil can also be great tossing with the pasta. If you have some anchovies in a can. I didn't show you those, but I also keep anchovies on hand. I love them. And you can mix some anchovies and olive oil and toss that with some of the cooked angel hair pasta. It's delicious. And speaking of cooking, having fats on hand that have very long shelf lives, that are very shelf stable, is very important. Now, you can easily make your own ghee. Ghee is basically clarified butter, where the milk solids have been a little more toasted than in just the traditional clarified butter, but you remove the milk solids, and so now you're left with something that's very shelf stable and very flavorful for cooking with. So it's nice to have some ghee on hand. Also, tallow, where I've showed you how to render beef suet to make tallow. Well, tallow, cooking beef fat, beef fat for cooking, is very shelf stable. You can have that at room temperature, and having that on hand to maybe when you're warming something in your frying pan, whatever you've decided to purchase. Sometimes you can get roast beef in the can. That's been really in short supply during everything we've gone through this last year and a half. But at some of the big box stores, you can find roast beef in the can the same way you can find chicken in the can. And you can warm that up on your little trivet in a little frying pan with a little bit of beef tallow. It's very tasty. And what makes having apple cider vinegar and olive oil, ghee or clarified butter, and tallow in your emergency food supply is once you open any of these, none of this needs to be refrigerated, so it's perfect. Now, no discussion about emergency food would be complete without talking about having some treats on hand. But first I want to mention taking care and preparing for your pets. Always make sure in your emergency food supply that you have extra dog food or cat food or whatever kind of food you have for the type of pet you have. And make sure you have some treats for them too. And also, if you have dogs that are active chewers, it can be a really good idea to have some types of toys or snacks they like that they can chew on. Because depending on what the situation is, and especially if it's bad weather, and they can't go out as often as they're used to, maybe on their walks and whatnot, that having something to keep them occupied can be very helpful for them. Now, in terms of snacks for humans to keep us happy and occupied, I think that it's really important to know the things you like to eat as comfort foods or treats, and then just have some of those on hand. They can even be in your prepper pantry that you're rotating through on a regular basis, but that you can also have enough that can at least last you 2 weeks for your emergency food supply. And some of the things that I like to keep on hand, this is a little trail mix that my grocery store sells. It's just got peanuts and raisins and M&Ms. The M&Ms is a nice treat to have in there. When we were kids, we used to make it homemade and call it gorp. I don't know if any of you remember that, good old raisins and peanuts, but adding the M&Ms was something special. And then I've got a little dark chocolate here. These are just individual wrapped pieces, which is good. It helps with portion control. And then I really like keeping some of these graham crackers on hand. My son loves these. They've got the cinnamon topping, and these are sold by my grocery store. And it's nice. It's kind of a smaller box, which is great. Since we're not a big family, and these also are very limited ingredients in this particular variety, and it's made with whole grains, which is nice. Then of course having dried fruit on hand is wonderful. These can also help out at breakfast time. Having some individual raisins are nice too if you have young children and you just want to give them a box all to themselves. I really like these little whole grain, kind of like, they're similar to Fig Newtons, but they're made with whole grains, and they come in different flavors. They have the traditional fig flavor, they have blueberry and raspberry. I think I get these usually in a big box at Costco or Sam's. And if you have a fireplace and you have an old-fashioned popcorn maker, this can be fun to keep some popcorn on hand. And the nice thing about popping corn, it's not popped yet, but whole corn like this that's specifically made for popping, this is basically a forever food, which I found fascinating when I learned that. So you can definitely have that in your, not only in your emergency food supply, but in your survival pantry, which is something that I've shared with you in a previous video where I talk about forever foods. I'll be sure to link to that. But if you've got one of those old-fashioned poppers and a fireplace, this can be a lot of fun, and it's nutritious. Next, having some nuts and seeds is very good to have on hand. These are all very high protein foods. You can also maybe keep some of these like nut and seed, sort of like protein bars are a good thing to have on hand. And everything here has a pretty good shelf life, at least 6 months, in some cases a lot longer. In the case of these peanuts, they're dry roasted, and I was just amazed to see that they're good through the beginning March 2023. You'll also want to have some paper products on hand. I like these because they can do double duty as both a bowl and a plate, but also having some paper cups, some plastic cutlery. That's very important, especially if you don't have water, because you don't want to use the water you have to be worrying about washing dishes. And especially if during that emergency situation you're caring for anybody who's ill and you can't get your water hot enough to really sanitize your dishes and cutlery, then paper plates and forks and knives and so on and so forth are very important. Now, if you'd like to learn more about how to be prepared for any type of circumstance, be sure to click on this video over here where I have my Prepper Pantry series, and I show you how to start a Prepper Pantry, how to do it on $5 a week, how to store your food to keep it very healthy and fresh, and all sorts of things along the Prepper Pantry line. And I'll see you over there in my Texas Hill Country kitchen. Love and God bless.